Hello, everyone. I see I've got the sun in my eyes, but maybe it's just a spotlight wherever I go. So you might have noticed when I came up on stage that I have no arms and I'm just over a meter tall. So I do share your obvious first thoughts. As a speaker, I always insist on a hands-free microphone. So what you're going to learn from my presentation is that I've learned to do things a little bit differently, and that's what I think Future is all about. How can we use what we have? How can we focus on what we can change instead of focusing on all our limitations? So firstly, I type and write using my toes, and I text with my tongue. I promise I can out-text everybody in this room. So I try not to focus on what I can't do. I believe so strongly that our limitations, they're mostly in our heads, and it's definitely in our hands to change them. So for me in this presentation, I really wanted to focus on the reflections that I've had as an adult, not only as a clinical psychologist, but also as a child growing up with difference. So for me, it's really important to recognize that there are so many learning points that I've made in terms of recognizing what we can do during early childhood development to really get the best for children to thrive, but also ourselves as adults, that we can really put these learning points into practice. So today I've got time to share 3 of those learning points that I hope will change the way you think about your own situations. First of all, I just have to establish in this room that I am so grateful for the statue of the Venus de Milo. She proved to the world that women without arms can be stunningly beautiful. But don't you think she is an attention seeker for not wearing a shirt? These are my nephews, Daniel and James, and when they were little, they always used to ask me, "Auntie Nicky, why are you so short?" And I'd always reply that I never ate my vegetables. You can use this line when you get home to your children. I promise they are going to eat their broccoli. So today, my first learning point for you is to believe in yourself. So in psychology, we have the debate, as most of you know, nature versus nurture. So are we born to be a certain way, or is it our environment that determines who we become? And like most of you, I think it's a little bit of both. So I've got some video footage to talk about nature, what we're born with. Okay, I was exceptionally cute as a child. Let's just get that out of the way. When I was born without arms and shortened legs, there was absolutely no medical explanation for my disability. I'm so fortunate that my parents, who were not teachers or doctors or nurses, they had absolutely no information about my disability, but they chose to focus on what I can do. So it was never the case of, well, can Nicky do this? It was always going to be, well, how can Nicky do this? And that's because they believed in me. So many people ask me when they see these videos, "Nicky, how on earth did you learn to use your feet?" And it's exactly the same question I can ask all of you. How did you learn to use your hands? We just learn to use what's available to us. What I love about me taking my first few steps here is that I can see on my face that I didn't get my physical limitations. As I was walking, every time I fell down, I'd simply get up again. And that's because I believed in myself. I believe that every single person in this room was born with that same inner drive to do whatever you set your minds to. It's just when we grow older that we start to doubt ourselves and compare ourselves to others. Look at how proud I am taking those first steps. So from a young age, I like to be the center of attention. This is me at a birthday party. The girl in the pink dress is my older sister, Karen. And the big fat baby, who looks a little bit like Buddha, is my little brother, Stephen. So don't all of you wish that you still had the flexibility, but the absolute determination of your youth? I definitely do. Now, when Nicole and Mitch came to visit me in my office to ask if I'd want to be part of Think Future, they asked me if I'd do that on stage for you. And I said, no way, it's just not that kind of a conference. Maybe a bit later. So what are we going to do to ignite that inner drive? I love this quote from Martin Seligman's book, The Optimistic Child. Martin Seligman is one of the greatest founders of positive psychology, which I certainly live by. The basic premise is, don't ignore what is wrong, but focus more on what is right. And I love this quote from the book. It's that children's natural state is of activity and optimism. When we are a young child, we believe anything is possible. But what happens to block ourselves as adults? And ultimately, for us to be truly optimistic means that we have to enter a vulnerable state. And that's what Bonnie was talking about earlier, about being bold. If we enter that vulnerable state, it means that we have to acknowledge that we might fail, that we might be rejected, and there might be major setbacks. So we need to be okay with entering that vulnerable state to ultimately be optimistic in everything that we do. Brings me to my second learning point for today, and that is to focus on what you can do. It's so important. So often we're so fixated on everything that is wrong. And really, in the world today, there are so many things we can list. But why can't we focus on our strengths? So I've got another video clip of you, and it's really giving away my age here with this old footage. This is why I'm so passionate about early childhood development, because this is absolute testimony of how important it was to me growing up. So I was fortunate that I grew up in a small town called East London in the Eastern Cape. Anyone in the audience? We definitely related in some way. But you might be wondering why this video was being taken of me. You can see this is shy Nicky. None of you wanted to be in my house that morning when my parents told me that I was going to be filmed. Because now I was so fortunate to be in mainstream schooling. Back then, inclusive education definitely wasn't the norm. But back then, a student doing her master's in educational psychology was doing her master's thesis on inclusive education, and she wanted to use me as an example of how it can work. And back then, I just wanted to fit in with everyone else. I didn't like this idea of this camera. Why are they filming me? Why don't they film everybody in the class? So you can see I slowly warm up to the camera as time goes on. But I think what's so important about watching this video is to see how everybody just works around me. A lot of the people in this video are still my best friends today. Here you can see the early onset of obsessive-compulsive disorder. I needed to get that tablecloth exactly right. But one of the most important stories I want to share with you about this time of being in this exceptional nursery school that was called Playways is that I found out only a few years ago about how I was introduced to the school. And I think it is the most incredible way any of us can introduce difference, whether it's in a school, in business, in any platform. So what they did the day before I arrived at the school is that the teachers asked all the children to paint using their feet. Now, you can imagine the children thought the teacher was a little bit crazy, but this could be fun. They made a mess. And then at lunchtime, the teacher asked everybody to eat their snack while they're sitting on their hands. I think at this point, children probably thought the teachers were crazy, but they did it, and they struggled, but they did it. And then at the end of the day, they said, tomorrow we have a special girl coming to our school. Her name is Nicky. She has no arms, and she uses her feet. There's no better way to introduce me. I arrived day one, a mini celebrity. Everybody wanted to be friends with me. I mean, how incredible compared to me arriving that first day, people not understanding what my abilities, what my limitations, what some of the things that I would struggle with. And I really encourage everyone in this room to think about how you introduce difference. Make it something that's more encouraged to be embraced. I think in this part of the video is when they took inclusive education to the next level. I mean, making me wash the dishes. There have to be some perks to having a disability. So what is so important about this learning point of focusing on your strengths is to recognize that as I grew older, I stopped being able to do everything along with my peers because, remember, I didn't eat my broccoli, so I didn't grow as tall and as strong as my friends. But that's when I really had to focus on what I can do, not on what I can't. So here's a perfect example of my teacher showing how I can be on a lower level and still do everything along with my friends. My friend nearly wipes me out there, and off I go. Didn't quite make the Olympics. I think if my parents actually watched these videos, they might have never sent me back to school. Almost got wiped out. But what is so important is that when I got to about 11 or 12 years old, I couldn't take part in everything, but what I did is I changed my mindset and I focused on what I can do. And what I could do was speech and drama, I suppose no surprise there, and academics. I loved doing my homework. So weird. I love this quote from the great Sir Ken Robinson, which I'm sure everybody knows of. Every child and adult, without exception, has special needs, and it's just in some cases that we can see what they are. So I often feel that I'm at an advantage. When people meet me for the first time, they know that I have gone through things. But also, they maybe make different assumptions about me, and it takes some time. I've learned that I've had to be very open about what's on in the inside for people to see that. But this is really what motivated me to follow a career in psychology, is because I was fascinated by the hidden disabilities, about how so often people are struggling with psychological challenges. I've always been struggling with the physical ones, but we're fighting for exactly the same independence. So for me, I want to challenge all of you to think about what some of your disabilities are. I believe that every single person in this room has 1, 2, or 3. Something that happens when you have no arms, just by the way, I'm gathering I'm the only one in this room, but something that happens is that all your friends tend to send you video clips of armless people doing amazing things. And they're everywhere in the world. So on a daily basis, I'm getting video clips of a man playing a guitar with his toes, another man playing the drums, a woman in America without arms flying an aeroplane. And you know what I always have to reply to them? I'm sorry, I'm such an underachiever. But it's always made me fascinated. Why is it that sometimes people who have such obvious limitations seem to excel? And the book that made absolute sense to me was Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath. He uses the biblical story of David and Goliath to illustrate how we are biased to believe that Goliath is going to win because Goliath is big and strong. He's a giant, he's an ogre. But actually, what is brought up in the story is to recognize that because David understood what his limitations were, that made him the obvious winner. And you know what David did? He had weapons. So when you know what your disability is, and hidden disabilities are such a challenge to understand, that's when you can create your own weapons. So when you understand what your limitations are, you know how to overcome them. And that's why I think I was at such an advantage being born without arms, because my parents and myself, we knew exactly what my challenges were going to be, and we knew that my education and my voice were going to be two of the greatest weapons I could ever have. So 2 weapons that I want to share with you is about focusing on my strengths. I know that if I had to write a list of all the things that I can't do, I would be depressed. My second weapon is that I've learned incredible active listening skills, Abdul. So you use what you don't have, or you really emphasize the things that you do have. And for me, as a psychologist, I realized when patients come to me and I'm taking notes with my toes, it's kind of a bit distracting. So I've learned ways to ditch the clipboard. Don't wear a tweed coat either. And I've employed active listening skills. I've got an incredible memory, and I can remember absolute detail of people that sit in front of me. So those are my 2 main weapons. So it brings me to my final learning point today, and that is to adopt an attitude of gratitude. So often we make the fault to think that happy people, people who have everything, are grateful. And it's not the case. It's people who are grateful for whatever they have that are truly happy. I love this cartoon, and I've learnt from being able to speak around the world that this is universally accessible. We are so quick to complain. It takes us a long time to get into that gratitude line. When things go wrong, we're quick to say something, to tweet it, to head off to TripAdvisor. But how often when we have something so intensely good happen to us, do we go to the person, do we go to a public platform and say thank you? I believe so strongly that those of us who truly understand gratitude and make it a daily practice are the ones that want to go beyond gratitude and want to give back. So I want to encourage all of you is to end each day thinking about 3 things that you're grateful for. So some days it's going to be really hard. So some days it's going to be, number 1, the day is over. Number 2, I'm in my bed. Number 3, tomorrow I'm going to click Control-Alt-Delete, reboot, and restart. There are going to be other days where it's going to be really easy to find out what you're grateful for. So I want to share 3 gratitudes to you in my closing. Gratitude number 1 is that my parents, my family, my teachers, my friends, they believed in me. They helped build the nurture in my life to get me here on stage today. Number 2, I drive a car hands-free. So I'm not a complete underachiever, but I can safely say that technology has translated to my freedom. And number 3 is that I've learned over time is that my biggest perceived limitation, my physical disability, has actually become my ultimate strength. I'm so grateful that I get to share this story and hopefully elicit change in you to think about what is possible. So I want to challenge everyone here today to implement these 3 learning points. Believe in yourself. Ignite that inner drive that each of us was born with. Focus on what you can do, not on what you can't. Remember, you mustn't ignore what is wrong, but you need to focus more on what is right. And adopt an attitude of gratitude. So there I say, thank you for believing in me.